Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com. According to the website mn350.org, countless scientists, climate experts, and government officials agree that 350 parts per million is the safe level of carbon dioxide. So let's go back in time and see what the climate was like the last time CO2 was below 350 parts per million. That would be during the summer of 1988 when much of Yellowstone National Park burned up. There was a terrible drought across much of the United States, and the Mississippi River nearly ran dry. This is what experts now call a safe climate. This was the front page of the New York Times on this date in 1988. Global warming has begun, expert tells Senate. Sharp cut in burning of fossil fuels is urged to battle shift in climate. Washington, June 23, 1988. Dr. James Hansen of NASA told a congressional committee that it was 99% certain that the warming trend was not a natural variation, but was caused by a buildup of carbon dioxide and other artificial gases in the atmosphere. The Mississippi River was almost dried up, and it was the hottest June 23rd on record in the United States. Almost two-thirds of stations were above 90 degrees that day. This map shows U.S. temperatures on June 23, 1988. Red dots show locations which were above 90 degrees Fahrenheit or 32 degrees Celsius, and pink dots show stations which were above 100 Fahrenheit or 38 Celsius. As you can see, June 23, 1988, when Dr. Hansen gave his testimony, was an extremely hot day with 100-degree temperatures from coast to coast. But the fact that he gave his testimony on a very hot day was not a coincidence. Senator Tim Wirth of Colorado organized the hearing, and later he told this to PBS. We called the Weather Bureau and found out what historically was the hottest day of the summer, so we scheduled the hearing that day, and bingo, it was the hottest day on record in Washington or close to it. It was stiflingly hot that summer, and at the same time you had this drought all across the country, so the linkage between the Hansen hearing and the drought became very intense. What we did was went in the hearing room the night before and opened up all the windows. I'll admit it, right? So that the air conditioning wasn't working inside the room. So when the hearing occurred, there was not only bliss, which is television cameras and double figures, but it was really hot. Hansen's giving this testimony. You've got these television cameras back there heating up the room, and the air conditioning in the room didn't appear to work. So it was sort of a perfect collection of events that happened that day, with the wonderful Jim Hansen, who was wiping his brow at the witness table and giving this remarkable testimony. So they picked what they thought was the hottest day of the year to hold the hearing, and then they went in the night before and sabotaged the air conditioner. This is how the global warming scare began, with a sabotaged air conditioner. Dr. Hansen told the committee that he was 99% certain that the heat was caused by carbon dioxide, which he called an artificial gas. But the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration told a completely different story. They said, analysis of warming since 1881 shows most of the increase in global temperature happened before 1919. Before the more recent sharp rise in the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, said Tom Carl of NOAA's National Climatic Data Center. While global climate warmed overall since 1881, it actually cooled from 1921 to 1979, Tom Carl said. And the NOAA administrator said, in spite of all the well-publicized concern about global warming, you must understand that there's still considerable uncertainty among scientific experts. This was a direct rebuke of Hansen's claim of 99% certainty. Let's look again at these statements from NOAA in 1989. They said most of the warming since 1881 occurred before 1919. Now let's compare this statement from Tom Carl to NOAA's current temperature graph. They now show a lot of cooling from 1881 through 1919. NOAA has altered the data and reversed the trend. The pre-1919 strong warming trend is now a strong cooling trend. And in 1989, NOAA said that Earth cooled from 1921 to 1979. But NOAA's current global temperature graph shows warming from 1921 to 1979. So both of the trends mentioned by Tom Carl in 1989 have been reversed. In climate science, the future is 100% certain, but the past has to be constantly rewritten. Also in 1989, NOAA said that the United States had not warmed since 1895. But the current NOAA U.S. temperature graph shows warming from 1895 to 1988. Government climate scientists are constantly rewriting the past in order to meet the needs of current politicians. Now let's look at some more predictions from NASA's Dr. Hansen from the 1980s. 35 years ago this month, he predicted that the United States would warm 4 to 6 degrees sometime before the year 2020. And he predicted a huge increase in the number of 90-degree days at Washington, D.C. and Omaha, Nebraska. In the article, it says that he was talking about the number of 80-degree days, but that's a typo. He was actually referring to 90-degree days. Now let's look at how his predictions fared. Logan, Iowa is the closest currently active United States historical climatology network station to Omaha. In 1988, Hansen predicted a large increase in the number of 90-degree days there. But the exact opposite has occurred. There's been a sharp decrease in the number of 90-degree days since the 19th century. And it's the same story at Washington, D.C. Purcellville is the closest U.S. historical climatology network station to Washington, D.C. and Virginia. And once again, Hansen was completely wrong with his 1988 forecast. Instead of seeing a large increase in the number of 90-degree days, Purcellville has seen a sharp decrease. Hansen had no clue what he was talking about because his beliefs were based on superstition rather than science. Across the United States, there's been a sharp decrease in the number of 90-degree days over the past century. Hansen made his predictions during the very hot summer of 1988, but that was the last really hot summer the United States has seen. Almost all of the hottest weather in the United States occurred when carbon dioxide levels were below 350 parts per million. Let's look now at another misprediction made by Dr. Hansen in 1988. He said that during the 1950s, the chances of summer drought in the mid-latitudes was just 1 in 20, but by the year 2030 it would increase to 1 in 3. But as is normally the case, Hansen had no clue what he was talking about. During the 1950s, the chances of summer drought were actually 1 in 2, not 1 in 20 as Hansen claimed. He was off by a factor of 10. Brown represents dry periods and green represents wet periods. Over the past 60 years, the United States has been much wetter than it was in the 60 years prior. There's no correlation between atmospheric carbon dioxide and droughts. By 1999, James Hansen had realized that his predictions for the United States were failing rather badly. He wrote this paper lamenting the failure of the United States to warm as he had predicted. His U.S. temperature graph showed the United States cooling since the 1930s, with 1934 and 1921 being the warmest years. He said, empirical evidence does not lend much support to the notion that climate is headed precipitately towards more extreme heat and drought. In 1999, Hansen realized that his global warming theories, which he was 99% certain about, were failing. So he did what essentially all government climate scientists do. He altered the data. This was NASA's U.S. temperature graph in 1999. It showed a strong cooling trend from the 1930s through the end of the 20th century, with 1934 being the warmest year, 1921 second warmest, and 1998 more than half a degree cooler than 1934. But then Hansen altered the data to turn this cooling trend into a warming trend. NASA now shows warming from the 1930s through the end of the 20th century, with 1998 being warmer than 1934. The actual temperature data didn't meet the needs of politicians like Al Gore, so government scientists altered the data to meet the politicians' needs. According to the press, countless scientists, climate experts, and government officials agree that 350 parts per million is safe. Apparently, they believe that the dried-up Mississippi River in 1988 was part of a safe climate. Dr. Hansen successfully drove a lot of people to madness in 1988. Democrats want to sue fossil fuel companies for providing the energy which people need to survive. But when green energy failed in Texas during February and people died, Democrats wanted to sue the fossil fuel companies for a different reason. Democrats complained that these companies weren't providing enough fossil fuels. So Democrats want to sue fossil fuel companies for providing enough fuels, and they also want to sue them for not providing enough. It's difficult to understand how people could be this irrational. The one thing that is 99% certain is that they're going to become victims of their own madness. Toto understands that climate alarmists are completely insane and that their belief system is based on junk science and tampered data. You can visit Toto Kyrie and their new cohort Caesar on the web at realclimatescience.com.